So guys, now let's learn about if else statement. That means if the condition is true, so it's mean like if the condition is true, it will do something, and if the condition is false, it will do some other things. Okay, so the syntax is kind of like this: if, then the parenthesis, then you need to write the conditions, and then if the condition is true, then put a curly braces, then write some statements. Okay, and then if the condition is not true, that means you need to write else. Okay, and again put curly braces and write something which should happen when the condition is not true. Okay, so this is basically the syntax of if else statement, and after writing all the lines inside the if else statement, you can just write semicolon so that the JavaScript can know like the line is ending over here. Okay, you can also choose not to write that thing. JavaScript will automatically do that for you. Okay, so let's do some basic things. For example, we have our id, assume. Okay, so I'll make const id is equals to 100. Okay, and now if the id is equals to 100, so you can see there are like single equals to symbol, then double equals to symbol. Both are actually different. Let me put it inside the parenthesis. Yeah, so both are actually different. When you write single equals to symbol, that means you are assigning some value to that variable. So id is a variable which you created using the const method, and we are assigning 100 to id, right? But when you write double equals to, that means you can't assign a variable. You are actually checking whether id contains that value or not. That means whether id is containing 100 or not. Okay, and now inside the curly braces you can just write anything. For example, I'll just write console.log, and I'll just write id is you already know about template string, so we are going to use that thing. So yeah, id is id. Okay, that means id is, it will just write the value of the id variable. Okay, perfect. And let's write some else condition. So you can also choose not to write the else if there is like only single condition. So I'll just write else, and if the id is not equals to 100, then do these things which I'm going to write. Okay, so console.log, I'll just write id is not 100, something like that. Okay, now if I save it, you can see it's printing id is 100. That is because of like it is just checking whether id is 100 or not, but the id is of actually 100, so that's why it printed only this line. It is not running this section over here, right? But if you just write 101 over here, that means now we are assigning id is id with the value 101, right? So the first condition will be false, so it will not go inside that if statement, so it will not check this line, then it will just check the else statement, that means this line. Okay, so now it should print id is not 100, right? So now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is not 100. So there is one more thing, like you can use equals to, then less than, greater than, not equals to. Not equals to is like put an exclamatory symbol, then equals to, that means it is not equals to. So if the id is not equals to 100, it should be printing id is not something like that, id is not the value of that id. And if the condition is true, that means if id is equals to 100, it should print id is 100. Right, now if I save it, you can see it printing id is not 101. Okay, it should be id is 101. Yeah, now if I save it, oops, perfect. Now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is 101, right? So that is because of id is not equals to 100. That is true because id is 101, so it printed this line, right? But if id is 100, it will just print this line, id is 100. Okay, so let's just quickly put it equals to, and yeah, id is not 100. I'll just write not over here. Now if I save it, you can see it printing id is 100, so that's perfect, right? But it is not actually checking the type of 100. So here we initializing id with 100, which is a number data type, right? So it is actually checking the value whether it is 100 or not. It is not checking the type of it. So if you write 100 as a string, so now id is a string, right? So now if I save it, you can see it is still printing id is 100, but we are not checking with string. We are actually checking id is whether equals to a number of 100 or not a string 100, right? So if you want to check the data type also, you need to write triple equals to. So we already wrote 2 of them, so now you have to write one more. That means now it will check the value as well as the data type of it. Okay, so now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is not 100. That means like id is not 100 in number data type, it is actually in string data type. So if you put this 100 into a string format, it should print id is 100, right? So you can see it printing id is 100. So now if I just remove this quotation from here, so now we are initializing id with number data type 100, but we are checking whether id is string data type 100 or not. So now if I save it, you can see it is still printing id is not 100. That means it is not a string 100, it is a number 100, right? So to check the data type also, you need to write triple equals to symbol. Okay, and similarly if you want to check whether it is a not equals to that, so you need to write normally not equals to, we write exclamatory then equals to, right? So since we are using now triple equals to, so you need to change the first equals to with exclamatory symbol and then 2 equals to. Okay, now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is 100. Yeah, that is because of it is a number data type and this is a string data type. So the condition is actually true because the number and string is not same, right? So that's why it printed this line id is 100. So if I change it with normal 100 and save it, you can see it is printing id is not 100. You can also check whether the type of this thing is this or not. So I'll just quickly make it into a comment, and then I'll just write if then type of, and then inside the parenthesis I'll just write id. So assume you wanna get input from the user and you wanna check whether the user is giving some input or not. If the user doesn't give anything, it will be undefined data type, right? So since I also want to check the data type also, so that's why I'm writing triple equals to. Okay, so I need to write not equals to actually. So if the id is not null, okay, so that means if the type of id is not equals to undefined, then do certain things. Okay, so I'll just write console.log, and here I'll just write something like if the id is not undefined, that means id has some value, right? So I'll just write id is dollar curly braces id. Okay, because id has some value now. But if the id is undefined, that means id doesn't have any kind of value. So else console.log, then I'll just write id is null or something like that. Okay, now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is 100 because id has some value. But if I just write let id instead of const id, now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is null because id has no value right now. Now similarly you can also check less than, greater than, less than equals to, greater than equals to. Let me show you that thing also. So now if I comment this thing, and now I'll just write if we have the id which is 100, right? So if the id is the id is less than 200, then do a certain thing. Okay, so I'll just write console.log id is less than 200. Okay, else else console.log id is greater than 200. Okay, and now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is less than 200 because 100 is obviously less than 200. But if you just write 200 over here, and now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is greater than 200, which is not true because the less than 200 means it will check up to 199. Okay, so 200 is obviously not less than 200, right? So it should be less than equals to 200, and I'll just use over there less than or equals to 200. Okay, now if I save it, you can see it is printing id is less than or equals to 200. So this is the less than equals to symbol. Okay, and now assume you have multiple conditions. For example, I'll just comment this thing, and I'll comment this id also, and now let's just make something like color. Const color is equals to assume blue. Okay, now I want to check whether the color is blue, yellow or red. If the color is blue, then print that color. Okay, so for example, if the color is equals to blue, then do like console.log color is blue. Okay, and then we also want to check if the color is yellow or not. Okay, so else if you need to write else if. Okay, so else if color is equals to or triple equals to actually. So yeah, now if the color is actually yellow, then do some other thing like console.log color is yellow. Okay, and then if the color is not blue, not yellow, then just write else console.log, and here I'll just write something like color is neither yellow nor blue. Okay, now if I save it, you can see it is printing color is blue. That is because of, you know, obviously color is initialized with the blue variable, but if I change it with yellow, now if I save it, you can see it is printing color is yellow. But if I just write red and if I save it, you can see it is printing color is neither yellow nor blue, right? So if you have multiple conditions, you can just use else if multiple times. For example, if you want to check with red also, you can just write else if color is triple equals to red or not. If that's true, then do a certain things, else the color is not blue, not yellow, not red also. Okay, and now let's see some logical operator. Okay, so I'll put it comment again, and now let's see some logical operators. Okay, so I'll make some variable const name, and that will be Steve, and const age, that will be 20. So now I want to check whether the age, if the age is less than 12, I want to print it is a child, like the name is child, and if the age is less than 19, the person is actually a teenager, and if the age is not less than 19, that means if the age is greater than 19, the person is an adult, right? So for that we need to use the AND operator. Okay, so because we want to check with multiple conditions. Okay, so if the age is greater than 0, also the age is less than 12, then console, it should be console.log, and the name, that means here it is Steve, is a child. Okay, and I'll just quickly copy this thing, and now I want to check with another conditions. Okay, so else if the age is greater than equals to 12 and age is less than equals to 19, then the name is a teenager. Okay, and else the name is an adult. Okay, now if I save it, okay, unexpected curly braces, where is that? Okay, yeah, the else and if should be separated with a space, right? So now if I save it, you can see Steve is an adult. That is because of the age is 20, which is greater than 19, right? But if I change it with something like 15, now you can see Steve is a teenager. Similarly, if I change it with 9 and save it, you can see Steve is a child, right? So this symbol means if the first condition is true, also the second condition is true, then only go inside that statement. Okay, so if the age is greater than 0 and if the age is less than 12, then only perform this certain tasks. If age is greater than 0 but if the age is not less than 12, then don't go inside that statement. Okay, so similarly, obviously, if I just write 15, 15 is obviously greater than 0, but it is not less than 12, so it is not doing this thing. Okay, it again check the second condition. That means if the age is greater than 12, yeah, that's true. If the age is less than 19, that's also true. So that's why it will print this is a teenager. Okay, so now if I save it, you can see it is printing Steve is a teenager. Okay, so that's how this AND works. And there is one more thing, OR. Okay, so I'll just quickly copy this thing also and paste it here, and I'll change it with OR. OR means two vertical lines. Okay, this symbol which is above your enter button. Okay, and I'll change it with this also, and yep, that's all. So now if I save it, we have the age is 15, right? So now if I save it, you can see in the first case it is printing Steve is a teenager, but in the second case it is printing Steve is a child. That is because of in the first case it find out that this condition is true, but this is false, so it will not perform this thing, right? But for the else if it all the condition is true, so that's why it printed Steve is a teenager. Okay, but when you use the OR, okay, it will just check for only one condition. If any one of them is true, it will perform that certain task. Okay, so it first check whether age is greater than 0 or not. Yeah, that's obviously true, 15 is greater than 0, but age is not less than 12. It will not check that because at least one condition is true now, right? So that's why it will do this thing, and it will just it will not perform any one of these, obviously, right? But if I just remove this age is greater than 0 or okay, so now it will check whether age is less than 12 or not, which is false, so it will not do this thing. That means it will not print Steve is a child. Then it will check whether age is greater than or equals to 12 or not. Yeah, that's true. So it will not check age is less than equals to 19 or not. So now if I change it with like 25, so now if I save it, you can see it is printing Steve is a teenager, because that's false, because it is not checking this condition. Okay, so OR means if at least one condition is true, it will do that thing. Okay, but for AND, all the condition must be true, otherwise it will not perform that certain task. Okay, so that's the difference between AND and OR. Now I'll just quickly make this in comment. And the last one is the shortcut one, which is ternary operator. Okay, so I'll just write ternary operator. Okay, now this is like we are actually writing if, then if the condition is true, then do a certain thing inside the curly braces, then without the else statement, then again some statement inside the curly braces. So it minimum takes some like 3 to 4 lines of code, right? But with ternary operator, you can make it a single line of code. Okay, so for example, I'll just make a variable called const id, okay, which is 100, which we already created, right? So now if the id is 100, then do this thing or do another thing, right? So we can do it like this. Okay, so id is equals to 100. That means it is a number data type. If the condition is true, then put a question mark symbol, then do whatever you want to do when the condition is true. For example, I want to print like the condition is correct, so I'll just write the condition is true. Okay, now we have to write when this condition is not true, like when it is not true, do another thing, right? So for that you need to separate it with a colon symbol. Okay, so I'll just write the condition is false. Okay, so I also want to print these things, like the condition is true or the condition is false. So I want to print this thing, so I'll just make it inside the console.log. Okay, so console.log, and now if I save it, you can see it is printing the condition is true. So first of all, it check this condition, where if it is true, it will do this thing, and if the condition is false, it will perform this thing. So that means if I change it with something like 200, now if I save it, you can see the condition is false. Okay, so this is all about this ternary operator and if else statement. Okay.